ونستعينه ونستغفره ونسلم ونسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. So we got to the statement of the Prophet ﷺ, وَلَا تُدَابِرُوا, do not turn your backs on one another. So tudabura means musarrama or hijran, that is to either turn away or to hijra, to, I can't think of an English word for that, to cease engagement with something. What would be a word for the hijran? What's it translated as there? I can't think of an English word. Really, I'm blanking.
My dictionary. Weird.
Huh?
That might sound weird.
No, it should be in your English.
It is Arabic.
Oh, Arabic doesn't help me, can it? Hijran. I can't think of the word. Give me an English word for that. Hijran. To cut oneself off. That's the right word. There's a word for it in English. You are not to bar. What do you call that when you to blockade? No. Anyway, that's what it means.
Embargo?
Huh?
Embargo?
Yeah, like to put an embargo or something like that. Yeah, to cease relationship. So it's the idea of turning one's dabur means one's backside, so basically it's like turning your backside to someone, not to face them. This is what tadabbur means in Arabic. So we've been talking about obviously this whole issue of issues of brotherhood in Islam, and we covered quite different things. I'm trying to see what page it starts on here. Let me start there. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Okay. Sorry, I'll get myself together here. It's one of those days for me. The past 24 hours has been that way for me, basically. So the Prophet ﷺ said, do not turn your backs one on another. And so this is one of the issues of brotherhood, not to do. And so the Prophet ﷺ says, narrated by Anas, لا تحاسدوا ولا تباغضوا ولا تقاطعوا كونوا عباد الله إخوانا كما أمركم الله. He said, as narrated from Anas radhiyallahu anhu, do not envy one another, do not be angry with one another, do not cut off relations one of another. So here it is taqata'a. وَكُونُوا عِبَادَ اللَّهِ. Instead be brethren for the sake of Allah. Or it could be kunu ya ibadallah, or be, O servants of God, brothers, as Allah has commanded you. So I guess you could translate that two ways there. And so the reason that Imam Ibn Rajab has put that hadith here is because of the statement of the Prophet, وَلَا تَقَاطَعُوا. So the idea of qat'a, that is the idea of cutting off relations. And then he mentions here a well-known hadith narrated by Imam Muslim and Imam Bukhari on Abu Ayyub radhiyallahu anhu. The Prophet said, لا يحل لمسلم أن يحجر أخاه فوق ثلاث يتقين يسد هذا ويسد هذا وخيرهما الذي يبدأ بالسلام. This hadith is narrated by Bukhari, Muslim, Ahmed, Abu Dawud, Tirmidhi, and Ibn Hibban in his Sahih. So it is not permissible, لا يحل, for a Muslim to not have relationships, or to cut off relationships for his brother in faith greater than 3 days. The two of them meet, and each one turns on the other, so they don't engage with each other. The best of these two is the one who begins with salam. So the one who seeks to reconcile a broken relationship is the best of the two. And this basically is the gist of here's a larger discussion here about the idea of salam. And then he narrates from Abu Dawood, the Prophet saying, "Man hajra akhahu sana fahuwa ka safki damihi." He who separates or cuts off relations with his brother for a year is as one who has spilled his blood. This is narrated by Abu Dawood, Bukhari. Imam Hakim also narrates it. So there's a very serious interdiction of the Prophet. So some statements about not having relationships, to actively engage, not to engage. You intentionally do not engage with other people. You cut yourself off with other Muslims. Obviously, there could be reasons for that, why one does that. In the context of what's been previously mentioned in the hadith, the two qualities are mentioned. The Prophet said, do not mutually envy one another, do not be angry with one another. So obviously, these are two emotional states. You can engage with someone, you can have envy towards someone, and you can be angry with someone. That's why you don't talk to them. That then becomes your reason for not engaging with them. So it's almost as if this idea of cutting off relationships is almost a result of the previous prescriptions of the Prophet ﷺ. So obviously, if you are carrying a grudge or having animosity towards someone or envy towards them, you've built up a negative emotional attitude towards that person, then or they've done something you don't like, or they do something you don't like, to you directly, or they act in some way where you just don't like, or they don't agree with how you express your Islam, they don't agree with it, they're not, maybe you find something incongruent with them. And I'm not talking about something which we'll get here about innovations and things like that. I'm talking about something you just don't like. So it's very easy to find reasons to not engage with someone. It happens all the time. And so then we develop our reasoning, and then we carry it out by cutting off relationships. So I think that in the context of the hadith as it's been worded by the Prophet ﷺ, this idea of tadabbur, or turning one's back, and the idea of cutting off relationships is almost a result of your just attitude towards the person. So it's really a fuller expression of dislike, anger, whatever it may be towards the person. So obviously there has to be some remedial to this, and the Prophet ﷺ and the hadith that he mentioned here, the best of those, the best of those two is the one who makes the effort to, and the first thing is, and it's mentioned here, a little bit more of a discussion, that you begin by greeting someone, just by greeting them. You can start greeting someone, and that's helping to overcome your barrier of wanting to engage with them. Of course, there are other ways you can do it too. You can send them a gift. If you can't confront someone, maybe what you want to do is, up front, if you can't confront them, then maybe you start out by sending them something or doing something good for them. So you soften your heart towards them that way. So you're going to soften yourself up a little bit, take away some of the anger, take away some of the envy, whatever it be that you hold in yourself, until you can actually operationalize it by actually confronting them face to face. Because tadabbur, its opposite is tawajjuh, is turning to, is facing someone. So you can take that literally. So just as you build up your emotional attitude and then you carry it out by turning your back, you may have to reconstruct your emotional attitude, soften yourself up in some more gentle ways of approaching the person before you actually approach them. If that helps, it's a good thing. If you can't, just get to them face to face. And then, of course, the Prophet or something. There's one hadith here. This one, the last one I read, was that if you do it for over a year, it's as if you spilled his blood. And of course, that's one of the things that are haram. A Muslim's blood is sacrosanct. So. Though you haven't really done it, it's as if you've done it. So you can see sort of what that means, in the sense that if you don't try to mend the relationship, it's sort of like a disease. And it's like a disease, it progresses until the person dies. And sometimes, it happens, people develop something and then it just becomes where the relationship is, they kill the relationship, and then they can have repercussions then outside of this too, because you can carry it to a point where then you start demanding others to have that same attitude towards the individual that you have your animosity towards. So for example, you're a parent and it's very common, the father gets mad at so and so, and then what? Then you can't play with so and so's kids anymore. Or your wife can't talk to his wife anymore. So then it has this sort of like, it's like a virus that sort of spreads, and you force other people to get sick with you. So this is the problem with that. So if you carry it on a long way, it's as if you've killed that person, because you really have effectively killed, something which is fundamental in the Muslim attitude towards social interaction, is that the community is very important. There are things in the community that are communal. The religion is geared towards the community cohesion, and you can see this, for example, in a mosque, for example. People create problems, so what they do, the Jamaat splits up. It has mitosis, it splits off and mutates, and you get two Jamaat, because so and so on the board didn't like so and so on the board, and they were the fun guys who provide the money, and so bam, they separate from each other, and they don't try to reconcile. People don't try to reconcile them to keep the Jamaat. So what happens is that they take their little cohorts with them, and so bam, you get another 2 mosques on the street all of a sudden. And that happens. That's a very common thing to happen. It's happened in this community. Happens all over. Because people don't try to do what? To reconcile. They don't take reconciliation seriously. But they take their pride and their egos and their anger and their envy and whatever. They take that very seriously. But they don't take reconciliation seriously. But reconciliation is a quality of believers, and you can read through the Hujurat, where Allah, it speaks about, the sulh between trying to reconcile people, and this is what believers have to do. But sometimes it's easier just for a person to follow their nafs at that moment than to follow intellect. And in the prophetic way is to try to use your mind to resolve the problem. And so that's why when you extend these things to longer periods of time than necessary, they do have they have repercussions that can be serious for the individual, for their family, for the community. Particularly if they're people of prominence in the community, it can create problems that way. There are 2 areas in people relationships that people get really picky about. One is family, the family honor, the family name, the tribe, whatever it may be, to preserve that. And then the other is your issues of faith, or maybe sports teams too. But your soccer team or your cricket team. But that's like false religion there. But family and religious affiliations become really tension points that you try to maintain your relationship strong within or not. And when you break those relationships, oftentimes they can be very severely, the results can be very severe. The outcomes aren't good.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What about friendship that you feel you have to leave because it's driving you away from your religion?
Okay, that's the next paragraph. Yeah, so وكل هذا في تقاطع لأمور دنيوية فأما لأجل الدين تجوز or تجوز زيادة على ثلاثة. So that's like 3 days. So you get 3 days to try to reconcile. After that, it becomes problematic for you. Okay. After 3 days, though, if it's just a worldly thing, and those are the ones which we usually oftentimes run into. What about if it's religious issues? Well, there, scholars say that they can be more long-term or even permanent, cutting off of relationships. The Prophet ﷺ warned about the munafiqun, for example, and people who had clear nifaq. Of course, in our time, that's a hard one to say because, one of the first things that you say to someone who you don't like religiously is that they're a munafiq. That's always the standard. You try to use that word nifaq. It's like that's the post-it note they get, And because your definition of nifaq is what? They're not doing what they should be doing as a Muslim. Well, if you were a real Muslim, well, you really would, because like real Muslims don't do things like that. You know what I mean? And I hear that so much from people. And that's people who have a very shallow understanding, or who have this, or have such idyllic understanding of Islam, or what a Muslim. They have such a high bar, what it means to be a Muslim, that no one ever met that bar. And if they did, they're all dead. And so, the result of that is that they must be hypocrites. But this is a very foolish and childish attitude, but it's a very common attitude among Muslims. Well, they'll find that you do a mistake, and what happened to me? I had an anger issue at the urs, and I got upset, and I was upset for Ahmed, and then one person approached me and said, well, I remember what you gave in a talk about one of the reasons why you became Muslim was that you liked the Prophet's character traits, so this is like so against the prophetic character traits. I said, yes, so what about that? I said to that person, once you put this barrier, this bar with someone, they have to, because, for example, I said something in a bayan that the reason I converted to Islam was because of the prophetic character traits. Then, if I don't meet that standard now after so many years, then I have, my Islam has also been invalidated. Only a fool does something like that. It's like the father who expects a perfect son, and he makes and he gets, a 99 on a test. And the father goes on about as if, the relationship was broken for the rest of their lives. These are foolish and simplistic and self-ingratiating attitudes. Because they make the person who says that as if they console their own egos or emotions by saying that to you. But the reality is, no person after the Prophet ﷺ is perfect. No person ever had perfect qualities except the Prophet. That's a Sunni belief. So they may have a heat more than you, but if I said that Sayyidina Abu Bakr didn't sin, I'd be a liar. And a sin is a breach of adab with Allah. And that's the worst thing you could ever do. To think that it didn't happen is a fool.
a foolish belief. It really is. But we have the attitude with lots of people, from Sahaba down to Tabain, Tabatameen, to Awliullah, to the scholar on the street, or we have this bar, we projected an understanding. I'm not saying that they're not respected and they're better than any of us in this room, but it's to say that they're sinless or without mistake, well, that's an attribution which is, there's no proof for that. There's no proof for that. It's just our opinion of them is that. But our opinions, if we take that literally, it would be falsely. So we have to remind ourselves, it's not an excuse. And I think that what I was saying to the brother was that, yeah, I admit that. I have a reason I got angry, and I did. I have no problem. I admit that. But it doesn't mean I don't stand on my principles, or I don't still have my expectation, or I still, that's the reason fundamentally why I'm a Muslim. But I don't go around measuring people on such a low, on that bar, that if I see one slip up, I walk away from them. That's exactly what Sayyidina Abu Bakr did when that man, he was sponsoring, and he was one of the people who was, making ghibah against Sayyidina Aisha about committing adultery. And then Sayyidina Abu Bakr said, well, I'm never going to give him any more money. I'm not going to help him again. And Allah then says, wouldn't you want Allah to forgive you? I mean, and so at Sayyidina Abu Bakr, we realize, it was wrong for him to be that way. If Allah can forgive, I can forgive. But we are less forgiving than Allah. I guess because we are more righteous than God, I suppose, in some way. We know better. Allah says in the Quran, reminds us that if He took mankind for everything we've done, He would have destroyed us already. Except the Anbiya. But remember the Prophet ﷺ said, if the sin was so great that even the righteous get caught up in the destruction, their resurrections are different though. The point being is, we need to have the attitude. If you have this bar where you think that people, when they make a slip up, that automatically is anathema, that you label them a hypocrite, this is a foolish statement. Because a hypocrite is someone who lies consistently. Right? He's a habitual liar. That's a hypocrite. Or when he's angry, he's very abusive all the time. That's a sign that, and these are actually signs of nifaq. But unless you have them all and you're consistent with them, then you can probably say that person's a munafiq. But those are rare people, by the way. That when they lie, they speak, they lie. When they argue, they're that they're abusive. What's the other one? The signs of a munafiq?
Was it that Fajr and Isha Salah is upon? No.
No, the signs of munafiq that
when they give their pledge.
And when they give a promise, they break it. But those have to be consistent things. Oh, he broke. This I hear a lot. Someone makes a promise and they don't keep it. That's a big one right there. People, oh, he's a munafiq. Look at that. Can't keep his promise. Yes. How many people don't keep their promises? You make a promise every time you sign up for your electric bill, your phone bill, and you don't pay it on time. You broke your promise there. It's an agreement to pay on time. Yeah, well, a lot of people do. I do that. It doesn't mean you intentionally do it, but it may happen. It doesn't mean you're a habitual, promise breaker. It just means something came up. But that's actually a type of promise. Let alone, it's like I promised to meet you at the hotel, at the restaurant or something like that, and you don't show up, and I didn't call you and let you know I couldn't come, and oh well, look, I'm waiting there and you didn't show up. But, these kind of things. So we need to be very, very careful, because what we do is that we put a bar, it's too high for people to meet, and then what happens is we then start labeling them. And we label them and then we cut off from them. And we maintain bad opinions towards them. So we need to be more generous towards people, a little more generous, and seeing them, meeting them as they are, not having them try to meet us where we think they should be. Because most likely people will never meet you where you want them to be. You're going to have to meet them where they are. And maybe help them to get to where you think they should be, if it's a good place. It may not be for them, though. So that's what I remind you of. So 3 days, And then there are religious reasons. So of those religious, as a munafiq, a person who clearly has qualities of nifaq, and that needs discussion on that. People of bid'ah, of reprehensible innovation. Now that's, of course, that's a big one today, because that's the one that we can easily sort of like start labeling everyone around us as the reprehensible innovator. And it's a difficult one to navigate, because even among Sunni scholars there's disagreement on what does that mean, where should you draw your limits of interaction. So how we define it as a reprehensible innovator is something which we're not going to agree upon, but yeah, it's a big one. But perhaps that one needs a big discussion on that, obviously. But So I don't know what to say about that. You know, I'm being sort of catty with it, aren't I? It's a hard one for me to even reconcile myself how to deal with people. But we know it's a big problem in our community. We have clear divisions in the community by who we want to be, who we don't want to be with, who we want to speak, who we won't speak, where we'll pray, where we won't pray, etc. It goes on and on and on in the community. Who will buy meat from, who won't buy meat from, all that, etc., etc. So, but I think that personally, when reprehensible innovations are creedal innovations, fundamentally, and so that sort of narrows it down a little bit, you know, with people. And if I'm really honest about it, let's say you label someone as a certain group, they may belong to a certain group, you think they belong to a certain group because they go to a certain mosque or they pray a certain way. But you may not really, and I think that honestly, if you're honest about it, you may not know whether a person holds a position and beliefs until you actually ask them or they talk to you about it. And then you actually can gauge them. So if we said, for example, that reprehensible innovation would be a reprehensible innovator would be someone who holds anthropomorphic ideas about God. And so you know so-and-so who reads books or lectures about these type of things, and you think that, well, because of the things that he reads or he watches, he's a reprehensible innovator in issues of belief. But you can never really know that until you ask them. Honestly. It's like, think of communal sectarianism in Pakistan between Shia and Sunni, for example. You know, some have been born to a Shia family, but they don't know anything about Shiism.
Right.
But they get caught up in the killing at the mosque, though, because they're Shia. But they're not Shia in belief. They're Shia because they were raised in a Shia community, so it's assumed that person is a Shia, or you know, these kinds of things. So that's the problem: is that guilt by association is the general way we resolve that. We accuse you of that because your dad goes to that mosque. You must be that way too. You understand how that works? And that's unfortunately a human failure to be very objective and more discriminating with an individual. So you see, the Prophet ﷺ was very discriminating with the munafiqun, and he didn't tell people their names. Though there were some people who, from their actions, were clearly thought to be munafiqun, and the Sahaba picked up on it. But generally, the Prophet didn't tell people their names. He let them exist among the community. And perhaps there were many Sahaba who didn't know that so-and-so actually was, from the divine perspective, a munafiq. But since they didn't know, they still interacted with that person. The ones that were problematic were the ones that clearly created fitna in the community. They stirred up trouble. Okay, and there were internal mechanisms within the community to deal with them. They were dealt with. But generally, a lot of people just probably didn't know who was who. What I could take from that is, unless there are clear manifestations, someone can exist among you and be a reprehensible innovator, but that's okay as long as it's not something that they're actively out there, on the megaphone, on the soapbox, promulgating among the community. This is something to think about, and that's why maybe after in May when I go to San Diego on the 18th, that book reading by Ghazali on Faisal Tafrika Bain Islam wa Zindaka, where Ghazali tries to distinguish between, because in his time Ghazali had these Asharite scholars who were saying that if you weren't Asharite, you were an innovator. They were very hardcore Asharite scholars. And so Ahl Sunnah was defined as Asharite. That means that if you were Maturidi even, you were outside of that in some way. It was this very hardcore Maturidi Asharite approach towards who's in proper faith and who's not. And so Ghazali is responding back to this group of hardcore Asharites by saying, no, you have to be more inclusive than what you're willing to be. And so he lays out some arguments for that, and then he comes up with this conclusion of how you ultimately define someone as being within Islam or a Zindiq or an atheist or outside of Islam. And so as long as they're within Islam, they're fair game to be dealt with equitably in some way. Okay, they're not anathematized. So perhaps after May the 21st, and I give that talk, and I'm preparing for it. Then it's a two-day talk. Then maybe we'll have more discussion on that. But it's a problem about issues of innovation in the community and who we associate with and not associate with. And yes, in the spiritual writings, some of the texts that I've read from, that's mentioned about avoiding these people, etc. People who can threaten you, people whose conversation threaten you. When you have a conversation with them, they make you doubt your beliefs, or they make you angry, or they put feelings of dislike or hatred or coldness in your heart towards people you know already. That's when maybe you have to start pulling back a little bit at that moment until you can assess the situation. Understand that. So without getting too much details on this, I think that's where you need to sort of bring this down to about innovating people. If it's someone that you're not comfortable with, that they hold a belief, they've stated it, they do something you're not comfortable with, and it just makes you uncomfortable, intellectually uncomfortable, or emotionally uncomfortable, and you don't know how to handle it, okay, then at that time it's probably best to pull back from that person. If you can handle it and it doesn't threaten you, you can emotionally deal with it, and you can still engage with them equitably and amicably, then that's okay. Then do that. But if you feel that you can't, then that's probably when you should step back. This is probably the best advice I can give on this right now.
See, I have a question. So let's say if there's like a community imam, he wrongfully accuses the other community and tells the people in his community not to engage with the people of the other community without any legitimate reasons. So would the burden of that would fall on the imam or the people themselves?
Well, I think that if someone is publicly warning the community about a specific person who stands on a minbar and publicly teaches, then that person has to clearly make his claim, his argument quite clear to the people why this is, because so-and-so said such, this is a quote from him, and this is what our response is, and why that is a misstatement of the guy on that minbar over there. I think that's the best way to approach it. Now, just because someone says something on a minbar that you may not theologically agree with, you ask yourself, well, does that necessarily constitute an act of disbelief? Is it something that you can reconcile in some way for that person? That would probably require a little more nuanced analysis of what the person, for example, wouldn't it, if the imam at Mosque A said that imam at Mosque B said this, isn't the responsibility of imam at Mosque A to go and speak to the imam at Mosque B and as his brother in faith bring his evidence and say, this is why you said this and I would like to talk to you about it. I mean, are you willing to alter your opinion or retract it, and then, so I know where you stand on that. Good luck on that one. It's easy to stand on your minbar here and his minbar there, and with the four walls, streets, and houses between you two to shoot spitballs.
But who would the burden of
the burden's on the imam.
Even if the entire community cut ties with the other community.
What's that?
If one community cut ties with the other community.
Does what?
Cut their ties off, like they don't speak to them.
That's the same thing. Just because the guy in a minbar says something doesn't mean everyone in the group believes that. Understand? That's a fool. This is when it's so simplistic. All of a sudden, we break it down. Well, just because he walk. It's like you saw me. If I saw him walking to a Catholic church. Well, he's Catholic. Yeah. Oh, I saw Naim, at the Toyota car dealership. Either he works there or he's going to buy a Toyota. No, maybe just looking. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe my turban blew off my head and it flew over and I'm looking for it under the car. I don't know what happened, The point is, that's our problem, is that we assume that so-and-so believes everything the guy in the minbar says. And you guys know that's not the case here, because you've heard things in the minbar in this mosque. I know you all don't believe everything you hear. Right? But if you say, I go down north, they say, oh, well, you believe what the mufti says. Because why? Because that's the association. That's a foolish association. Just because Ahmad, Umar, and Zubair are my sons don't mean that they believe everything that Naim believes because I'm the father. It doesn't work that way. Does it work in your family that way? It doesn't work in your family that way, does it? No way. So why assume the same thing about the imam and the congregation? It's even less likely. But we don't see that at that moment. No, we don't see that at that moment. We don't see it at that moment. We assume they're all that way, and they're all that way. And that's what we do. So we label them that, we label them that, we label them that, we label them that, and so they're the labeled group. It's like Nazis doing it to Jews. Let's hurl them up, put them on carts, and take them off to the gas chambers. Why not? They're disbelievers. Their life is forfeit. The property is permissible for us to confiscate. Ya Allah, let's go get it. That's what the Wahhabis did. If you don't, it's our way or the highway. It's what Republicans do. It's our highway or the highway. That's such a human attitude. But even in jihad, you don't really fight people unless they're actually combatants against you. If you're in a warfare and the guy is running, you shouldn't even fight him when he's running from you. This is about there's a degree. When you're fighting, you fight. If he puts his sword down and he was a combatant one minute, and now he's submissive, then you stop. You don't go out and keep chopping away, because this is not what you do, because he's no longer against you at that moment. You stop. Even in the laws of engagement, there are rules that these laws of engagement don't act on this level of anathematization and of the bid'atization of the ummah. We have different rules of engagement. It's a free-for-all. It's like a hyena, dead zebra food fest. Just go for it and rip it up. And so I think that on that level, scholars in the community, the people of position, have to engage in conversation in some way, and then talk with people, and then understand that this is our differences, and if they're not reconcilable, then you make public declarations, if you have to, about irreconcilable differences, and that's it. But that's a nice theory. Did you guys see my like Facebook post? The one I just did about the what was it about Islamic Brotherhood? I went ha 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 on that one. It was a poster.
The fasting thing?
Huh?
Which one?
No, the fasting day one. That was a good one. It was one. Some was about Islamic Brotherhood. You know, and I went ha ha ha. Oh, it was like, you know, Islam is brotherhood, and there's no racism in Islam. And I put ha 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 on that one on Facebook. Yes, in Islam there's no racism, but there are a lot of racist Muslims. I put down. Did you see that one? Did you see that post? I said there are a lot of racist Muslims. There are Arab elitists. There are Turkish elitists, and there are I was born Muslim elitists. Arabs think that they're better than the Ajam. The Turks think that, you know, they're better than the Arabs, and if you're born to a Muslim family, you're better than a convert. Because, well, we always had Islam, and that person just came into it. So there's all types of elitism. Not in Islam, but with Muslims. But in Islam, there is elitism. There are the people of the right hand, people in the Muqarrabun, and there are the Shuhada, and the Salihun, and the Anbiya. So there are actually, in God's Islam, there are also degrees of humanity. And we're all not like teeth of a comb. We're teeth of a comb when it comes to equitableness. But we're not teeth of a comb when it comes to spiritual degrees and excellence with God. No. You know, God's a libertarian when it comes to division. Well, I mean, God's not even libertarian when it comes to worldly division, because some people get lots of wealth while living under bridges. So when it comes to provision, a rizq, Allah doesn't give equally. And no one seems to be complaining about that, except atheists or agnostics. But believers don't complain. They don't, you know, they just say accept it. It's like, mashallah, Allah will it happen, mashallah. Yeah. But, you know, so where was I with that? Why did I get on that path? So yeah.
We were talking about, so I raised that question
about that topic. Yes. We're all losing our brains right now, shutting down. So that's one, and the other one is dawata ila ahwa, a person who just is following his capri. A person of, you know, he's you know, the careless Muslim. You know, he's a Muslim, but he just, you know, drinks, smokes, parties, womanizes, manizes. I don't know, whatever they do. You know, whatever they have to do. You know, just enjoying the physicality of their bodies, the moment. MashaAllah, life is good. God's forgiving. He'll take care of it. Ya Allah, let's go. You know, and you know, so those would be careful about, because they're not helpful for you. You pick up from your friends. You know, if you have friends who don't offer prayers consistently, stuff like that, and you hang out with them, don't be surprised if you start missing a prayer. Well, we've been doing. They've been praying for a long time, and they still haven't had a car accident yet. So I guess God's overlooking it for them, you know, and you know, their cell phone's still working, and you know, and they don't have any, you know, cancerous pustules popping out on their body because of missing their prayer. So I guess God's okay with it. So I guess if I miss a few, it'll be okay too. Yeah, it's like that. You know, the world looks good. It's a good world. It's been a sunny day out there. Yeah. I was watching YouTube this morning about the extinction, the last day of the dinosaurs. You know, this makes me feel good, you know, when I'm feeling bad, to watch mass extinction events. I feel a little bit good. I feel a little better. Life isn't so bad when I know that one day it was a really bad day for dinosaurs, you know. So, my life isn't so bad, you know. Thank God it was a big, hey, what's that bright star in the sky? It's the end of the world, man. Ya Allah. You know, so anyway, yeah, I was watching it this morning. I don't know why I brought that up. I felt better afterwards. Felt sad for dinosaurs. Thank God birds survived. My wife is calling. Oh well. You can delete that online. Shaitan's ignoring his wife. No, I could be in my house and ignore my wife. I don't have to like be on the phone away from her.
No, astaghfirullah. Husbands and wives that way, they act like they're talking to each other in their own little world. You know, it's like, yes, do whatever you say. Yes, I'm listening to you, yes. They actually got like a little implant, like listening to something else. So, people who follow this, they're, be careful. I mean, of course, that's a problem there because, there's also, you have a responsibility of going out and calling people back to Islam, So obviously, if you're doing da'wah and you want to engage with people, you have to engage with people. So, I think that when you cut off relationships with someone, if it was someone who's just really following their hawa, their capri, is if it's really destructive in some way, and they can actually affect you directly, or your home environment, then you have to really start figuring out what you need to do about it. Okay? So that requires a little bit of thought.
I was saying same thing. So being with someone puts you in situations where it becomes hard to pray, or if you gang with someone. Because
yeah, I mean,
leaving prayer is pretty common, sadly, especially.
Well, just because people are actually against you praying, or they really bother you, or if you become more religious, you're the son or daughter becomes more religious, and the family freaks out, and they all get on your back, then you have to make decisions, how you're going to negotiate that with them. I don't think you should compromise your basic practices, but you may have to compromise how you talk with them or how you're going to engage with them. Like, you may have to compromise your own attitudes at that moment just to win them over, or to maintain a convivial environment within your home. You have to. And some people don't do that. They just cut themselves off. They're abusive to their irreligious parents, or their irreligious siblings. They're abusive to them. They're cold towards them. And this is not. I mean, only if they were really against you and you had no other place to go, you might take a wall like that and defend yourself. But those are really extreme situations, I think. Just because you're feeling uncomfortable doesn't mean you reciprocate with coldness when you don't have to. Now, if you live in your own home, you have your own space, and your family's across the street, then maybe you can make more of a stand that there's things you accept, you don't accept, and you don't accept that conversation, you don't accept that attitude in your own space. And then you have the right to do that. But I think those are really, those are at the moment, you make the call at the moment how you want to deal with those kinds of situations. You don't, be mindful, and I always warn people, be mindful of anyone who stands on the minbar and gives you these universal game plans. Because you never go into no coach ever goes into any football game with the same game plan he had to have from the last game. But we Muslims think that if we have some basic game plans that they're universally applicable. That's so foolish. It doesn't work that way. You have to really deal with it with the individual at the moment in that situation the best you can, and take it from there. So I think you always want to maintain. You always want to ask yourself, am I going to get angry in this situation? Will I get angry? Will I lose my cool? Will I hate this person more or dislike the person more if I continue in this? Those when you start putting up your barriers, because you don't want to exasperate an internal mindset or an emotional state of animosity towards a person, which then can blow out of control and make you respond back in a way where you become either verbally abusive or physically abusive in some way. And that could be like destroying their property, or calling them names, or getting on the internet and speaking out against them. That's when you know that things are going out of control. You understand that?
Someone's learn how to hold their tongue.
Oh yeah. Hold your tongue, cut it out. Put stones, rocks in your mouth, bite your tongue, bite your lip, slap your face, walk away, find a pillow, scream into it, whatever it takes. Yeah, seriously.
So, Sandy, which is the bigger degree of offense, just merely keeping animosity in one's heart, or actually keeping animosity in the heart and then going against and
obviously the core problem is the heart. The fruit is the hand. You can always stop the hand, but you may not get out of your heart. But as long as you're not displaying something, you're not actually showing aversion, physically apparent aversion, that's better. That's bad. That's good, because that means that it's a hidden problem. You keep it within yourself. But remember, sometimes you have an attitude towards a person, and when that person's not around, you talk about that person in front of other people in certain ways, and then you end up still not directly in his face doing something, but you sort of like build up your little group of self-loathers of individuals, so and so. You want them to dislike him like you do. So what you do is you feed them. You feed them your story, or you feed them what's going on, so that you also turn them on your side. Understand? And we do that. People do that. Now, that's a very dangerous thing to do. And like the only time you ever would probably do something like that, if you had to, is if something was done by a person of position, a scholar or something like that, who did something that was so unacceptable that it needs to be known, but the community needs to know this, because this is like you've gone beyond the limit, you've gone over the limit, over the valley, through the woods, and you're over, into some place where you should never have gotten into. And people need to know, because people then trust in you. Because what happens is that if people especially religious people, religious leaders do things, ulama, things like that, do things, because that has such, that first of all, that throws dirt on the religion. It makes religion seem bad. You dishonor the Quran in that way. You dishonor the Prophet in some way, because you claim your authority, and you claim your religious status from them, but you betray them. Then I think you have to do things much more public and put things to an end. There has to be something like that done, most likely. But he mentions here, what about then, but when it comes to a parent towards a child or a spouse, he mentioned a husband towards a wife here, typical. But one can go beyond 3 days. Like if it's an internal family issue that requires some type of ta'deeb, you don't do it out of hate, you do it out of, this of course, this is nice Islamic theory here, right? You do it out of trying to teach a lesson. As a corrective measure, right? So where you put up you cut off relationships just so that people understand that this is a serious thing. Either we have to come back to the table and talk about it, or we're going to be in this. We're going to have. I'm not going to talk to you for a few days, or engage with you, or give you your allowance, or let you do what have the car keys, whatever it may take.
But that's. For the higher authority, or
yes, it's the one who has authority to do that. But you have to be very careful, because obviously all these things. Well, what's your emotional state in that? Are you doing it to hurt them? Or are you doing it to actually to instruct them? If you're doing it to hurt them, then you need to be honest with yourself and stop it. If you're trying to instruct them, don't let your anger or your feeling of vengeance get back, that it sort of creeps in. All these things require a lot of thought. I mean. That's why when I read these things like this and books like this, it's like there's truth in it, but there's also it's a truth mixed in with poison, because the poison is not knowing when to draw limits within yourself, and that requires you. I mean, to be honest with you, when you read these things of the Prophet is speaking as a prophet to his community. Right? He's giving advice as a prophet sees things. He sees things on many levels. He's seeing them from his own personal experience, what he's had to deal with. He's seeing them from a person who understands God on a deeper level, so he sees what really angers God and what really pleases God on deep levels. He's seeing it from a state of contentment with God at the same time. So, he's seeing it from a level we can't really understand. So his advice is advice, but his advice is really for people who try to be really prophetic in a way of self-awareness. Okay? So, if you want to not mix your sense of vengeance with your disciplinary policy, you have to be very mindful of yourself to do that. You have to be very honest with yourself. And that takes a lot from you.
And so, what can be said about we can see this is a problem in our community. So sometimes if a party he's teaching Quran to the kids and he gets angry at them and then he gives them the worst beating ever.
Then that
hang them
person
from the
should.
fan, throw them from the stairs.
Well, then that person should be either disciplined by the administrative people or fired.
Right. This is like a problem in our.
Well, then that person has to be warned that you won't get a paycheck next week if you keep doing that. Or, yeah, that one's an easy one. You won't get a paycheck next week. That makes them stop. Right? You won't threaten them.
Throw them down the stairs.
You must have been a real troublemaker. I don't have to do that, do I, Rehan?
Oh.
I have my warning cards they get. Weekend detention at Camp Gizmo.
Much better.
Camp Guantanamo, North Houston. Orange jumpsuits provided. But, you know, and those are things like that, you know. They'll say, well, you know, the Prophet said when they beat them, draboom, you know, hit them. It's like, well, that's permission to do anything, right? Hit them, but, you know, you can hit with your word or a glance and much more than a beating. And I think it's why a lot of psychologically messed up Muslims out there. They were hit too much. Probably got their brains slogged around too much.
And they justify the party sometimes. They justify, oh, our teachers also hit us.
Yeah, it's like, yeah.
They justify it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. That's musassala, and it comes transmitted like a hadith. Yeah, I know that. It was done to me. That's my joke why parents try to get their sons and daughters married off to the person that they want to marry because they were forced to marry someone they didn't want to marry.
Yeah.
And they have an unhappy relationship. They don't want their kids to have a happy relationship, so they want their parents. Oh, well, I didn't have I had, your mom says, I was forced to marry your dad, you know, and I learned to love him. You know, I learned to love him. No, I mean, that's not like maybe real love. She basically, I learned to live with him and deal with him. He's a good guy, he provides, but but I still fantasize about Khan so-and-so, the cricket player. You know, I wish I could have married him. You know, but got stuck with your dad. And the husband says the same thing. I married her because my mom, you know, really liked her, you know. It's like, well, you should have married your mom then, you know. And I married her to make her happy, but we're so unhappy together. But no, I want my mom to be happy, so we pretend we're happy at home, you know. We're with, you know. It's like, you know, that's so sad. And maybe it works it doesn't really work anywhere. I mean, maybe it works some other village, some part of the world, 10 time zones away, but it doesn't really work. It's a bad mix. I mean, yeah, I mean, you know what I mean. Don't misunderstand me. But I think that there has to be more to a relationship than just, parental pleasure. But I sometimes think that parents force their kids to because they were forced to, and they think, well, I had to go through this hell. So and I got kids out of it. They're pretty decent, so maybe they'll do the same thing. But I think there are sometimes it's like it's like when we were in England. When I was going to go to England, a lot of issues with young girls being forced to marry a cousin, so that person can get a visa to come to England, for example. And yeah, it happens a lot. They're forced to, she's 16, 17, go to Pakistan for the summer. She's forced to marry a cousin, almost at gunpoint, to sign a marriage contract in order she can't understand. And then, bam, she's stuck. And if they consummate that marriage, she's really stuck for life then, because if she, and that, that's in the UK, maybe things are more liberal now. Things are changing, obviously, in the West about those issues, about, women who were married before, and who marry, divorced or widowers, and, and there's a whole stigma about that in the community, but with many Muslims. But, I actively warn, people about that, you know, when I'm in England. But, you know, this has to stop. You can't be forcing your daughters to marry someone they don't want to marry because, first of all, I don't think one person should ever be forced to do something like that, because you're forcing someone to give themselves, their body in a way which they may detest and hate, but don't have the legal capacity or the physical capacity to resist. That's the problem. It's abusive. And when parents use the parent trump card on that one, that's very selfish and evil in my estimation of things. But because I'm a liberal, you know, American grain-fed Muslim, so I have my attitudes towards things I can't reject, I think. But at the same time, you know, I think that it's also a cultural thing, because if a girl raised in England and grew up and maybe went to a public school in the UK and you know, was on Facebook and Twitter and, you know, and is going on and is forced to marry some guy who can't speak English, you know, who doesn't have even the concept of toiletries, that she has a concept of toiletries, you know, and bam, you know, she's forced to be the mother of this man's children and live with this guy and cook for him, and he's got his expectations of what she should be, and she can't make a right chapati, let alone, you know, it's a dangerous brew. So why did I get that? I don't know. It's not here or there about today's discussion, but you know, parents abuse their situations, can abuse their authority over their kids, and Muslim parents can do that very easily. But not just Muslims. I think it happens around the world in traditional societies. You know, in East Asian communities, in South Asian communities, in, you know, African communities, and Middle Eastern communities, because they're much more traditional and traditional values. But in the West, it's not such a big issue. You know, your parents may not even know what your name is anymore. You know, who are you? It's like, I'm your son. Like, oh really? It's like, oh, yeah. I didn't know. I didn't know I had a son. You know, it's like, wow. You know, so we're very dysfunctional, many of us in the West here. So, alhamdulillah, what can I say? So those are areas where you can, where hajr, you know, or putting up a lack of interaction can be permissible if it's a disciplinary issue, ta'deeban. But nuanced with, you know, asterisks there, footnote, be very mindful you don't abuse that. And the Prophet himself, you know, separated himself from his wives for a month.
That was my question.
You go ahead.
That was actually asking about instances in the Prophet when he did that.
Yeah, so it's right there. And yeah, so, and the women were offered a choice, either Allah's messenger or the dunya. Choose. If you want the dunya, Allah, ya Allah, Allah will give it to you. If you want Allah's messenger, Allah will give you that. And they all made a choice. They all chose Allah and His messenger, and things were okay in the hujurat, in the dwellings after that.
Sheikh, do you think you said there's no level of, especially with the Prophet ﷺ, sure there wasn't like it was purely disciplinary, or did he actually kind of, I guess, would he have wanted to maybe break that disciplinary, you know, avoidance of them the way he was kind of more forgiving?
I mean, when you read the Sirah, you know, I mean, my, you know, Sunday night serial movie, you know, it's like it's like, you know, it's a series, The Prophetic Household. You know, you got these women, and you believe your husband's the prophet of God. You know, God talks to him, angels come to him, and you know. And there's still women who love their husband, and of course you probably really love him because you don't only believe he's a prophet of God, you love him too, you know. And you know, honestly, I mean, I don't care. It was Arabian culture, you know, 1400 years ago. People have a hard time sharing their spouse. You know, it's a hard. I can't imagine that. Even today, I can't imagine it. I don't want to imagine it. But okay, I accept it. You know, I don't have to try and jump into the prophetic mind and understand what's going on. I don't know to do that, or their minds. But definitely, I can understand from human. We know from the evidences that there was intrigue among the wives. You know, there was trying to vie, you know, to their husband's pleasure and make him happy, and you know, and yeah, they you know. But apparently, things got out of hand. You know, with all some of those things. You know, it was since the wives were, you know. Their intrigues were getting a little bit beyond what was necessary. It was becoming disruptive. And he took that. I think the Prophet was a very sensitive person. I think he was emotionally sensitive. He was sensitive to people. And if he's in tune with God, God doesn't like, God accepts disorder, chaos in the world in a sense. But it's not something he loves. God doesn't love, for example, disbelief for people, but he allows it. So, if in the relationship with the Prophet in his home, the Prophet, I think, had a very sensitive issue about a sense of when you're in a home environment, there has to be some type of tranquility there. A sense that it's your space, it's your personal space. His wives were behind the hujurat. They were in there. They were behind the screen, and so he's a blind man, but you can still see him. The Prophet had manliness to him, and he had a masculine attitude towards not of loving his women and his home, but also they were of his home. His relationship with them was unique, as a husband to a wife, as any husband-wife is, and so not to share that on levels. And so when it came to, everyone knew that they were, Allah called these women, they're our mothers, but we can't even, marry them afterwards, and we can't actually see them in person anymore. We speak them, we hear their voices, but we don't see their faces, but they're still our mothers, and they have a motherly status with us. And the Prophet honored that, maintained that. He seemed to be very concerned about that. And so obviously when he's going into his home, and that's his special space, and bam, there are intrigue going on, that intrigue, ratchets up to divine displeasure. The Ridha of Allah was in a sense being, impinged upon by their activities, and that's normal. That's a normal human thing. We all do that, right? We're all in states of Ridha problems with God, impinging on that. So in the prophetic, I think in his own personal space, my understanding, my looking at it, Allahu A'lam, is that he would have been very, very sensitive to that. Because actually, if you think about that, he knows also that how his wives treat him is unique, because their spiritual outcome, their salvation is really key to their relationship with their prophet husband. It wasn't like he was just a prophet for them, he was a husband prophet for them. So he knew that if they keep mucking around, it's a bad path for them, because they are affecting it's a relationship with a prophet of God. And so Allah put that decision, the choice, choose God and his messenger or the dunya. It's almost like a faith choice for them. It wasn't like Allah doesn't say choose Allah and your husband. So choose Allah and the messenger of Allah. You choose him as the messenger of Allah, not as husband, because that's the ultimate criterion that the relationship was based upon. And he knew that if they broke that relationship, it would have repercussions with them. So I think on a deep level he understood that that's how he had to, the problem has to be solved from Allah, because the issue will be for them with Allah. Allahu A'lam. So he mentions here, just about that you try not to لا يحل لمؤمن أن يحجر مؤمنا فوق ثلاث, is that you try not to exceed beyond 3 days. And if you can, you be the first person to reconcile. Okay? So you try to overcome your problems. So reach out. Either you speak to someone, you give them a salam. Some people say that, some scholars said, if you just say salam alaikum to someone, you've broken it. Once you've said salam alaikum, then it's up to that person to respond back to you. That's a right, actually, right? That's one of the rights of a mu'min, is that when someone gives you salam, they return it back. So when you give them a salam, you effectively have broken the siege. And if they, turn away from you, then that it's with them then at that moment. It's not with you anymore. So it's like, you know, be the first person to say salam and be the first person to put your hand down and say, shake hands. When you give salam, you get more ajr by giving it first. If you shake hands, then, you know, sins fall away from you. It's a means of attaining, you know, having a kafara, a type of small kafara of sin. So you should work towards these things to have them in your life. Obviously, I think that the point about innovation is a really important issue that we need to maybe have a big, longer discussion one day about that, and then how we deal with it in context of this hadith. You know, if we ever have that discussion in the future about innovation, I know some of you have brought this up. We should have a big discussion about bid'ah and all that. Then probably a sub discussion in that would be then how do we deal with people who we may classify as the mubtadi'un, the people of innovation? How do we deal with them? Do we engage? Do we interact with them? What levels do we interact with them? And then the next was وَلَا يَبِيُّ بَعْضُكُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ عَلَى بَيْعِ بَعْضٍ. We'll just do that next week. I'm taking a lot of time on these things, but it's alright. It's a long hadith. It's okay. You know, inshallah, it's okay if you will. What time is it?
11:30.
It's 11:30. Let me give a call. You guys just take a 5-minute break. Let me call and see what's going on. I got 2 calls from my home, so maybe the house is burning down. I need to be informed.